The law matters, and we're here to help you to understand it a bit better. I'm Deb Morais, your host and moderator. This program focuses on making legal topics and information accessible to you. We offer legal information, real-life examples, and practical advice to help you navigate the complexities of the law. A solid understanding of the law, as we tell you, empowers you to protect yourself, your family, and at times your business. Hopefully, we're helping you also to manage it with a bit more confidence. So through our discussions of various topics, you may also find that you're able to handle some matters yourself, and that's great. However, if you decide you need professional guidance, you'll be able to more easily and effectively work with legal counsel. That's our intention. We hope to save you time, money, and always, of course, we want you to achieve the best possible results. We've been told by viewers and attorneys that they do tune in and that the information has helped. So as always, we want to extend our thanks to attorney David Bazar of the Bazar & Associates law firm in East Providence, who continues to provide his legal assistance and his valuable contributions and sometimes funny anecdotes at the topics that we handle each session. So, Happy New Year, the essentials of business we're going to talk about today. Launch the new year, launch a new business maybe. Many entrepreneurs choose to start their business at the beginning of the year often, and it's their choice to follow their dreams, fulfill their passions, or sometimes it's by default when your job falls through or things fold. But recently, several entrepreneur magazines have cited a lot of the more common legal challenges that really weren't as rampant as they seem to be now, such as they seem a little bit esoteric, like intellectual property and some ownership conflicts and some improperly documented equity agreements, different things like that. But we're here today really to handle some of the basics, although we'll touch on some of those kinds of problems too, which can be difficult as you're starting a business. As we would say, with some adequate knowledge and certainly with legal counsel, you're better able to handle the complexities of whatever your business is going to be. By the numbers, current numbers, apparently their U.S. alone has seen a surge in new businesses averaging, hard to believe, 430,000 applications monthly into 2024, which is significantly higher than even pre-COVID. So obviously, starting a new business is a trend. Some of the more recent industry focus, not surprisingly, AI, but professional and scientific and technical services, e-commerce, some healthcare, and also not surprisingly, a lot of the funding is done, as we find, by the founders through their personal savings. And I think that's probably going to continue. But the decision that you make to start a business and the structure that you have also impacts on how you might be able to or might not be able to fund it. So David, let's start. Someone tells you, I want to start a new business. Go ahead, do it on your own. When should they actually enlist a lawyer? So much you can do on your own, but.
You can do a lot on your own. If there's more than one person starting the business, then I would start to be concerned of trying to do that on your own for some of the reasons that you gave in the very beginning of some of the issues that can come up. So if it's one person, sole proprietor, and they're looking just to have some liability protection, it's kind of simple just to create a limited liability company or an LLC in Rhode Island at the Secretary of State's website. And I would get some advice from a lawyer before I did it, perhaps. I would get some advice from an accountant before I did it. But if it's just you, I think you can probably do that. When it comes to two people or more who are starting a business, and it's going to be more than a sole proprietorship, more than I'm just starting this out to, I've been doing this type of work, I just want to protect myself now. Then you start getting into situations where you probably want to have, if it's an LLC, an operating agreement that lays out whose responsibility is what's the liability of each, who's going to manage it, what are the voting rights, what are the equity stakes, as you stated. Or if it's a corporation, bylaws and the types of things that govern the governance of the corporation and the ownership of the corporation. At that point in time, I would recommend having an attorney weigh in on doing those things.
So when someone first starts out working from home, and then it's going to be my own business, as they say, sole proprietorship, as you mentioned, I don't need anything else, just sole proprietorship. I might put a bank account in a DBA, and I guess most people can do that by themselves. States do handle the DBAs differently, but do you think these days that a sole proprietorship without any kind of protection, personal protection, especially if you're working from your home, how dangerous is that these days?
Yeah, you're depending on the business,
Sure.
Of course, but you're opening yourself up to liability. So if your business is selling things, as you said, e-commerce or on the internet, and someone is hurt by something you're selling, first and foremost, I always say you should have insurance, but you should have a protection of a corporation or an LLC. And what that means is an LLC or a business are separate entities. So when you create that entity and you do business through that entity, as long as you funded it properly and have other things in place that don't allow someone to pierce the corporate veil, as they might say, to get to you, the owner, there's protection. The liability is limited to the assets in the corporation or the LLC, as long as you don't sign for things personally. So I would do business through that kind of model to protect myself from personal liability.
So sole proprietorship mentioned first. You mentioned limited liability company. There's LLP, the partnerships. There's corporations, S Corp and C Corp. And of course, when you get into corporation, that really is the shield that I think most people understand, even if they want to do an S Corp, which is a tax situation. Let's go through some of that for our viewers, because beyond that sole proprietorship, even if they don't have a partner, although we should go through that, I guess, a little bit more too, but when someone says, I really do want to have some protection, subchapter S is a corporation versus LLC. What are the differences?
Yep. So from a protection point of view, it's going to be pretty much the same type of thing. It's a separate entity, and the entity is liable for the actions of the entity, the actions you take on behalf of the entity, I should say. So for example, if you're able to rent property and have a lease, and the lease is just in the name of the entity, no personal guarantee, and the entity doesn't make it, it fails, the liability for the balance of what might be due on the lease is limited to the assets of the LLC or the corporation. So as a separate entity, you have protection from both of those. The two things you mentioned, subchapter C, subchapter S of a corporation, are tax issues. Whether the corporation is going to be taxed at the corporate level, and then any profit passed along as dividends, perhaps, which is a separate tax, is one way to set up a corporation. And there are certain advantages and reasons for doing it in that form. A subchapter S is a corporation that passes the profits or loss directly to the owners.
And so when someone's first starting out, of course, you save your pennies. Subchapter S is going to be less costly than a corporation when it comes to the taxes that a corporation has to pay and the rest of it. So there might be some advantage in doing that. Is it less costly to have an LLC?
An LLC is just a different entity, and it depends on the complexity of what you're setting up. An LLC can be complex in the sense that if you're going to create an operating agreement, there's a lot of different terms and things that can go into that operating agreement. And if there are several members, because in a corporation, the owners own stock. In an LLC, you have a membership interest. So the members, as opposed to the stockholders, may have certain things that they want spelled out, and that can become complex. But generally speaking, to start an LLC is simple. To start a corporation can be fairly simple. But the documents that go behind it, the agreements, the bylaws, or the rules, all of that being spelled out, the stock ownership, the membership interests, that can be a little complex. And again, may want a person doing it may want the assistance of a lawyer and an accountant in setting those things up.
So for many years, I've helped people start small businesses, and having a business plan is something they can do, at least start on their own. And there are many online options now to help guide that process. Same thing with marketing. There's still a very high failure rate of businesses, especially their first 2 years in business, often because they didn't have a mission, often because they didn't do a business plan, often because they didn't do marketing, often because they didn't understand how to price their product or service. So those kinds of things certainly make sense that someone can start to do on their own. Now, even if they haven't gone through the actual structure, although they think they might want to, LLC, if someone comes to you with those documents, are you likely to analyze those too? And how likely are you to say, let's bring in, I don't know, a tax lawyer perhaps too, or just an accountant?
An accountant, yeah. So I think it's really always a very good idea to plan and lay the groundwork for what you want to do and have a business plan in place that would be a projection of how you want to set it up, of what kind of business it is, what you project for income, what your expenses might be.
A roadmap, we call it sometimes.
We'll call it a roadmap. And an accountant can be very helpful in looking at that type of document that you might bring in to say, yeah, I think you're missing something here, or you overlooked this, or you should add this in, and or confirm that what you've done is realistic and it's covered all the bases. And a lawyer can help too, because when you do that type of work before you see the lawyer or the accountant, you've given them a good idea of what it is you're trying to accomplish, so they can better advise you on what route to take to accomplish that, between LLC, corporation, what type of tax selection to make, and that type of thing.
And the other side of it is too, while we're talking mostly right now about structure, there are so many other things that are involved with starting a business. As you mentioned, some even having a lease alone. People who start franchises, who's owning that lease? Sometimes the franchisor wants it, sometimes you think you should have it. There are a lot of those kinds of, which people really couldn't understand or know the ramifications of it. So having an opportunity to run this by a lawyer, especially when it comes to leases, or what are the things about lawsuits? What do you think about those things?
Let's talk about starting a business versus buying a business. Franchises, you're basically buying a business because you would be the franchisee, and then you definitely need a lawyer because there's a franchise agreement. And the franchise agreement spells out your contract agreement relationship with the franchise you're buying. And there's a lot of things that get put into that, a lot of expenses that get put into it, and a lot of rules that get put into it. And generally speaking, as you said, there's a lease that needs to be either on your terms or through the franchise, and either way, that needs to be reviewed. So buying a franchise can be a good shortcut to getting a good business and getting it up and running quickly, but before you do that, I would speak to a lawyer to review all the documents and an accountant to review the numbers that are being projected.
Yes. Supposedly, if you buy a franchise, at least you have the protection of the product, that the product itself is okay. But if you're starting a business and it's your product, somebody should check out the possible problems associated with your product, whether it's in how it's made or how it's used. And I think that most people, when they're starting, they have a great idea, but they wouldn't necessarily be able to understand what some of the problems are with it.
So if you're starting a new company and it's based on a product that you've developed, depending on the type of product, there's a lot of places you can send it for testing. I think it would be really important to send it out. I remember in the old days it was like the UL Lab or the Good Housekeeping Seal of Approval, whatever it might be, whatever the industry is that you're in. I definitely think that you need to get some certification from wherever you can that the product is safe and being used the way it's supposed to be used, labeled and marketed the way it's supposed to be, to limit your liability. Insurance, of course, number one, the protection of the corporation, number two, but doing it the right way with the right process is even as important as those things.
And what about licenses? So if you are working from home, you might need to know what licenses you need, whether it's you're a hairdresser or a nail tech, or I don't know, maybe you're actually creating something in a lab. Maybe somebody cares about how your home is equipped or your facility is equipped. What kind of licenses are needed, and who's best equipped to deal with those?
So the license that's needed for any particular industry is driven by what it is you're doing. So hairdressers need to be licensed through the state in Rhode Island, the probably Department of Health or whatever it might be. But there's another issue you raised, which is zoning. So if you're trying to operate a business out of your home, a home office, there are certain rules. You might be able to do certain types of things at home where you're doing it on the internet. People aren't coming to your home. It's not really interfering with your neighbors or anything that's going on with them, as opposed to, can you operate a hair salon out of your home? Might be an issue. Certainly there's an issue about you can probably, based on the zoning, not operate a retail store out of your home, or it even becomes an issue when you're operating something through the internet, but people are coming to your home to pick up whatever it is that they're buying, or it's being shipped from your house. And so you're warehousing and shipping products, and your neighbors see FedEx or UPS at your house 5, 6, 7 times a day. That may create a red flag in some issues.
Yes. What about when people are deciding that they have the need for helpers, independent contractors versus an employee? There's often a contentious issue about whether someone is which, and there's a specific listing of which one you are. So would you say that when people are starting out and they know that they want some assistance, they are needing a lawyer to help them determine who's an independent contractor versus who is a casual employee or a full-time employee?
Yeah, there's a lot of nuance that goes into that. And once you start hiring employees, then you have the obligation to have workers' compensation insurance and to withhold from the wages the proper taxes and other TDI, if it's Rhode Island, things that need to be withheld. So having employees, big step. A lawyer definitely, if you're having a question as to whether it's an employee or an independent contractor. And there are rules that go into that we can talk about. An accountant perhaps, and probably a payroll company or whatever other process you can use to make sure you're doing payroll correctly if it is an employee.
When someone's creating a product, for as many years as I've helped people start businesses, I don't remember the necessity of really pursuing an intellectual property lawyer, but that's becoming more of an issue now because whether you're creating something that's online or an application for online, there's a lot that's required to make sure that you have protection of your idea, because once it's out in the universe, it's very easily unprotected and lost. Yeah. What are your thoughts about that? Are there many intellectual property lawyers around?
There are some. You can always find them. Mm-hmm. We always recommend, if you have a product or a idea or something that can be protected and you want to put it out on the internet, get it protected first, because as you said, once it's out there, if you don't have the protection, someone else is going to either copy it, do it, or try to get it and protect it and say you can't use it. So very important if it's something that is able to be protected by a copyright, a patent, or a trademark.
When people are starting businesses, not just if they're doing it online, when they could find their own, they can buy and register their own domain if they're just and only going to be an online enterprise. When people are wanting to start a business and are looking for a name, do you find that people are coming to you to see if that is a safe name, is a secure or already taken name, or do you see now that more people are just going to go to the Secretary of State's office to do a search or somewhere else to do a search? What do you find?
Well, there's two things. First of all, a name for a business, they can do that. You can search the Secretary of State's website to see if the name is available. We do that for people a lot. But I always recommend, depending on what type of business it is, if you're going to be doing business, say nationwide, under a name like you want to select, is it copyrighted, trademarked, or something where you can't use that name? And so you start doing business. Yes, you have the corporate name because it was available, but is somebody going to come and try to stop you from using that name wherever they are? And the only way they really can stop you is if they have an ownership in that intellectual property of that name.
So that indicates that there really is a good reason to have a lawyer check it out or to be able to pursue that themselves. An EIN versus Social Security number, who needs one?
Yeah, so if you are doing business with an entity, an LLC, generally, or corporation, you need an EIN, employee identification number, for that business. And the reason, of course, is, first of all, it's a separate entity. And if it's going to file a tax return, it needs an entity number, a tax ID number to be able to file. And then if it's an S Corp, it's going to pass to you anyway. But generally speaking, if there's going to be a tax return filed, if you're going to have employees, you need an EIN number.
And a lot of people don't really know that, and they find out, well, too late, but better to check that out really when you're first starting a business, along with those licenses and permits. You had touched on in the beginning about partnerships. And if you're going to have a partnership, yes, you better have things in writing. At what point should someone see a lawyer? I'm your friend, we've worked together forever, we have a great idea, we get along, everything's great, we'll split it down the middle. Where does that go awry?
Yeah, when it's not in writing and there's no partnership agreement. And so when I first started practicing law in the early 80s, 83, we did corporations, we did partnerships, and there was no LLC. And oftentimes the reason you did a corporation or a partnership was because of tax reasons. A partnership, a general partnership, there's not a lot of protection. You're liable for the actions of your partner. There's a lot of issues. So then they started creating limited partnerships where there might be a general partner and a limited partner, and the limited partner might only be responsible for their investment in the partnership, where the general partner has more liability.
And control too, perhaps?
And control. So I have moved away from doing many at all partnerships because you can get the same advantages even from, well, I know limited LLPs exist, but if you do an LLC and have it taxed as a partnership, there's not a lot that you might be losing doing it that way as opposed to doing it through a partnership.
And yet,
in my experience.
And yet you still need to have the lines drawn about how you're going to manage this, operations or...
Either way, whatever you do. And I will tell you, I always defer to an accountant in determining whether or not it should be set up as a limited liability partnership or a partnership in general, as opposed to an LLC or corporation.
Are those more difficult to dissolve than even a corporation at times?
It depends on how you're operating and what you're doing. There can be a little more complexity to it, but generally speaking, if you're having a partnership, you want everything in writing so that the rules are spelled out for you.
So we say that when you are a bona fide business, you probably should have a policy manual and how you're going to do business, conduct business, even in how you're going to handle or enter into contracts with vendors or whomever. So when someone is starting to grow, they've started as a limited partnership, and the business starts to grow, if there's a disagreement about how that happens, is there usually an opportunity to write in, either in advance or as it's growing, how that can be accommodated? I want to grow, you don't. Now what happens to our partnership? Does that have to dissolve as an entity and start all over? It wasn't written up in the original agreement. We weren't sure. We didn't know how that would evolve.
Yeah.
How do people adapt to that? Because as I hear right now, some people each have their own businesses and are thinking about joining together to form a partnership. But where that's going to go is an unknown. Different people have different thoughts about how to grow or not grow. So how does that work, David?
I would deal with that all up front when I'm creating the new entity or partnership and have it spelled out. These are the rules. This is it. What is it if one person doesn't want to do something? How do they get out? What's the exit strategy? What do we have to do? So that's all needs to be spelled out in a partnership agreement.
So when people are small businesses, few vendors, few employees, do they still need to have all of that paperwork, even how you're going to work with the contractor or how you're going to resolve disputes and how much of, I mean, I can imagine, I can list quickly off the top of my head, so many documents that are necessary. How do you know what's reasonable?
So depending on the scale of what you're doing and how you're doing it, if it's just you and one or two other people and you talk every day and you do things, you might not say to the third guy at the desk, I need a purchase order from you so that we can pay the vendor that you bought the pencils from. But if you grow and grow and grow, you don't want people necessarily being able to reach out to vendors and create an obligation of the business. You want a structure for that. And so then you may require purchase orders for pencils. And so you got to look at the size and the scope of what you're doing and how you're doing it to decide what the correct complexity is. For example, manuals in HR. Do you need a manual for a two-member LLC where there's just two of you? Probably not. It's probably covered, hopefully, in a well-written operating agreement. But if you now have 15 employees or 20 employees and you want people to know the rules of how you're operating, then you might want to have an employee manual or some type of thing that lays out what they're entitled to for benefits and what the expectations and responsibilities are.
So if you're starting and you're working with someone relative to a startup and it's about structure, and you know that they're going to be entering into contracts with other people, is that usually, is that one of the main things that you would likely work out with someone in advance? Let's talk about how you're going to actually conduct business and what the specific rules and regulations are about that. How are you going to handle a vendor and what are the terms and how you're going to handle your employees or what are the contracts that you need to enter into? Do those things all need to be lined up right up front?
Or at least discussed and have a general idea or direction as where this is going to go and at what point do we need to start doing these types of things. So we talk about it. If some people just call and they say, I want you to form a corporation. And I say, okay, but what about this, this, and this? Yeah, no, this is what I want you to do. I'm a little uncomfortable with that, so I might have them have an engagement letter that says specifically, this is what you engaged me to do, and I recommended you think about these other things, and you have decided not to do those at this point in time. But it depends on the client, the situation, and what they're trying to accomplish.
I think it makes sense to say that often people know what they want to have done, but they often don't know what else to ask. So I was hoping that, and it seems that when we've been able to flesh this out a little bit today, perhaps we've been able to touch on some of the things that people don't think about when they have an exciting opportunity, an exciting idea. It's also a challenging thing. We hope that this has been helpful to you. If you are thinking about starting a new business, it certainly is exciting. And if you do, good luck. As we say, please continue to stay tuned to The Law Matters. It matters to you.